And also, I have no idea what section we're on now. Hi guys, this is Connie, back for some more Connie Reads White Fragility. I have been tripping over my words all day today. I promise I can read. So I think it's been a while. Skip ahead or something. I'll put the whatchamacallits in the description that says this is where we're starting. But I think we're on part like D, E, or F of chapter 2, which is racism and white supremacy. But here's the subsection called white supremacy. When we look back to the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, we might think of white supremacists as the people we saw in photos and on television, beating blacks at lunch counters, bombing black churches, and screaming at little Ruby Bridges, the first African-American child to integrate an all-white elementary school in Louisiana in 1960. Today, we might think of the self-described alt-right, white nationalist marching with torches in Virginia and shouting blood and soil as they protest the removal of Confederate war memorials. Most white people do not identify with these images of white supremacists and so take great umbrage to the term being used more broadly. For socialists and those involved in current racial justice movements, however, white supremacy is a descriptive and useful term to capture the all-encompassing centrality and assumed superiority of people defined and perceived as white, and the practices based on this assumption. White supremacy in this context does not refer to individual white people and their individual intentions or actions, but to an overarching political, economic, and social system of domination. Again, racism is a structure, not an event. While hate groups that only proclaim white superiority do exist, and this term refers to them also, the popular consciousness solely associates white supremacy with these radical groups. This reductive definition obscures the reality of the larger system at work and prevents us from addressing this system. While racism in other cultures exist based on different ideas of which racial group is superior to another, the United States is a global power, and through movies and mass media, corporate culture, advertising, U.S.-owned manufacturing, military presence, historical colonial relations, missionary work, and other means, white supremacy is circulated globally. This powerful ideology promotes the idea of whiteness as the ideal for humanity well beyond the West. White supremacy is especially relevant in countries that have a history of colonialism by Western nations. In his book, The Racial Contract, Charles W. Mills argues that the racial contract is a tactic and sometimes explicit agreement among members of the peoples of Europe to assert, promote, and maintain the ideal of white supremacy in relation to all other people of the world. This agreement is an intentional and integral characteristic of the social contract underwriting all other social contracts. I feel it in my everything, so I apologize. White supremacy has shaped a system of global European domination. It brings into existence whites and non-whites, full persons and sub-persons. It influences white moral theory and moral psychology, and is imposed on non-whites through ideological conditioning and violence. Mills says Mills says that what has usually been taken as the racist exception has really been the rule. What has been taken as the rule, racial equality, has really been the exception. Mills describes white supremacy as the unnamed political system that has made the modern world what it is today. He notes that although white supremacy has shaped Western political thought for hundreds of years, it is never named. In this way, white supremacy is rendered invisible, while other political systems, socialism, capitalism, fascism, are identified and studied. In fact, much of white supremacy's power is drawn from its invisibility, the taken for granted aspects that underwrite all other political and social contracts. Mills makes 2 points that are critical to our understanding of white fragility. First, white supremacy is never acknowledged. Second, we cannot study any socio-political system without addressing how that system is mediated by race. The failure to acknowledge white supremacy protects it from examination and holds it in place. I'm totally going to mess up this person's name, and I apologize in advance. Sound it out. In Ta-Nehisi Coates' essay, The Case for Reparations, he makes a similar point. To ignore the fact that one of the oldest republics in the world was erected on a foundation of white supremacy, to pretend that the problems of a dual society are the same as the problems of unregulated capitalism, is to cover the sin of national plunder with the sin of national lying. The lie ignores the fact that reducing American poverty and ending white supremacy are not the same. White supremacy is not merely the work of hot-headed demagogues or a matter of false consciousness, but a force so fundamental to America that it is difficult to imagine the country without it. In light of the reality of historical and continual white supremacy, white complaints about reverse racism by programs intended to ameliorate the most basic levels of discrimination are profoundly petty and delusional. As Mills summarizes, both globally and within particular nation states, then white people, Europeans and their descendants, continue to benefit from the racial contract, which creates a world in their cultural image. Political states differentially favoring their interests, an economy structured around the racial exploitation of others, and a moral psychology skewed consciously or unconsciously toward privileging them, taking the status quo of differing racial entitlement as normatively legitimate and not to be investigated further. Race scholars use the term white supremacy to describe a socio-political economic system of domination based on racial categories that benefits those defined and perceived as white. This system of structural power privileges centralizes and This system of structural power privileges, centralizes, and elevates white people as a group. If, for example, we look at the racial breakdown of the people who control our institutions, we see telling numbers in 2016 through 2017. 10 richest Americans, 100% white, 7 of whom are among the 10 richest in the world. U.S. Congress, 90% white. U.S. governors, 96% white. Top military advisors, 100% white. President and Vice President, 100% white. U.S. House Freedom Caucus, 99% white. Current U.S. Presidential Cabinet, 91% white. This is 2016 and 2017. Still predominantly white. People who decide which TV shows we see, 93% white. People who decide which books we read, 90% white. People who decide which news is covered, 85% white. People who decide which music is produced, 95% white. People who directed the 100 top grossing films of all time worldwide, 95% white. Teachers, 82% white. Full-time college professors, 84% white. Owners of men's professional football teams, 97% white. These numbers are not describing minor organizations, nor are these institutions special interest groups. The groups listed above are the most powerful in the country. These numbers are not a matter of good people versus bad people. They represent power and control by a racial group that is in the position to disseminate and protect its own self-image, worldview, and interests across the entire society. One of the most potent ways white supremacy is disseminated is through media representations, which have a profound impact on how we see the world. Those who write and direct films are our cultural narrators. The stories they tell shape our worldviews. Given that the majority of white people live in racial isolation from people of color, and Black people in particular, and have very few authentic cross-racial relationships, white people are deeply influenced by the racial messages in films. Consider one statistic from the preceding list. Of the 100 top grossing films worldwide in 2016, 95 were directed by white Americans, 99 of them by men. What is an incredibly homogenous group of directors? That is an incredibly homogenous group of directors. Because these men are most likely at the top of the social hierarchy in terms of race, class, and gender, they are the least likely to have a wide variety of authentic, egalitarian, cross-racial relationships. Yet they are in the position to represent the racial other. The representations of the other are thereby extremely narrow and problematic, and yet they are reinforced over and over. Further, these biased representations have been disseminated worldwide. While white supremacy originated in the West, it circulates globally. White resistance to the term white supremacy prevents us from examining how these messages shape us. Explicit white supremacists understand this. Christian Piccolini, a former white nationalist, explains that white nationalists recognized that they had to distance themselves from the terms racist and white supremacy to gain broader appeal. He describes the alt-right and white nationalist movements as the culmination of a 30-year effort to message the white supremacist message. We recognized back then that we were turning away the average American white racist and that we needed to look and speak more like our neighbors. The idea we had was to blend in, normalize, make the message more palatable. Derek Black, godson of David Duke and former key youth leader in the white nationalist movement, explains, "My whole talk was the fact that you could run as Republicans and say things like we need to shut down immigration, we need to fight affirmative action, we need to end globalism, and you could win these positions, maybe as long as you didn't get outed as a white nationalist and get all the controversy that comes along with it." Today's white nationalists are not the first to recognize the importance of distancing oneself from more explicit expressions of white supremacy. In a 1981 interview, Lee Atwater, Republican political strategist and advisor to Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, explained what came to be known as the Southern Strategy: how to appeal to the racism of white Southern voters without pronouncing it openly. Oh, they're going to make me say this quote. I know this quote, and I hate this quote. Warning, this is profane language. I hate this word. You can start out in 1954. I'm just tripping over my words. You can start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts you, backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. You're getting so abstract now that you're talking about cutting taxes, and all these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and a byproduct of them is that blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. But what I'm saying that I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we are doing away with the racial problem one way or another. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut this is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger. Oh. I don't think we're ever going to be able to redeem that word until we actually get the acknowledgement of white supremacy. Our umbrage at the term white supremacy only serves to protect the process it describes and obscure the mechanisms of racial inequality. Still, I understand that the term is very charged for many white people, especially older white people who associate the term with extreme hate groups. However, I hope to have made clear that white supremacy is something much more pervasive and subtle than the actions of explicit white nationalists. White supremacy describes the culture we live in, a culture that positions white people and all that is associated with them, whiteness, as ideal. White supremacy is more than the idea that whites are superior to people of color. It is the deeper premise that supports this idea, the definition of whites as the norm or standard for human, and people of color as a deviation from that norm. Naming white supremacy changes the conversation in two key ways. It makes the system visible and shifts the locus of change onto white people, where it belongs. That says locus, but I wonder if that says meant to say focus. How weird would it be if I actually found a reading error? That's not normal. I just never used the word locus before. It also points us in the direction of the lifelong work that is uniquely ours, challenging our complicity with and investment in racism. This does not mean that people of color do not play a part, but that the full weight of responsibility rests with those who control the institutions. Yep. And that's the end of the white supremacy section. And then we have, I think, one more section until the end of chapter 2, finally. Be careful with that and enjoy, please and thank you, and I will see you for the next installment. Have a great one.